This is Sexy Funny Raw, where we chat all about the world of sex, from dating and relationships all the way to the adult industry itself. I'm Silvia Saige, and this is my Pornspective, answering all the questions you weren't even brave enough to ask Google. Get ready, because Sexy Funny Raw starts now. All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Sexy Funny Raw. I am your host, Silvia Saige, and of course, with me, as always, is Dr. Eddie, giving us the public health perspective. We appreciate him so much for that, because certainly I don't know it all, and I love being told when I'm wrong. And then to my right, I have the lovely comedian and podcaster, Monarey Martinez. Thank you so much for being with us. And today we have a very interesting episode. Now, I'm going to try not to get too excited about this or put in too much of my own personal perspective. But we today are talking about sex when it comes to drugs and alcohol and different drugs and how they stimulate you differently. Say hello to my little friend. Or how they affect you differently when it comes to your sex life. So let's get into it, because there are obviously a lot of drugs that you kind of associate with sex and sexuality. I think the number one is probably going to be alcohol. Yeah. And a lot of times we don't think of alcohol as being a drug per se, but it absolutely is. And it's something that is an incredibly addictive drug at that. And I think for a lot of people, myself included, it's definitely a way of lowering your inhibitions, you know? So it's making you more sexually aggressive, or at least that's what it's making me. Mm-hmm. But it also has the downfalls of I lose my ability to get wet, and it also loses my stamina. I sometimes would be able to perform at a much more higher, more fun level of sex. As sometimes where when I am drinking, I feel like I'm exhausted, and like I could normally ride your cock for a good 5 minutes, but now that I've been drinking, I'm like 30 seconds up here and I'm tapping out, you know?
You get like nauseous. It's like being on a roller coaster. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I need a timeout.
Shaking
fast.
Everything up.
No,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Dr. Eddie, what are the main downfalls of alcohol with sex?
Oh, goodness. I'd probably say that consent.
No,
memory.
Very true. Very
consent,
true.
memory.
Things I don't think about.
Those are going to be like the major
downfalls,
repercussions of it. Alcohol in general, it's going to depend on how much alcohol. You know, here in the U.S. and in Great Britain, we're known for drinking heavy and pretty aggressively. Other parts of the world, not so much. So since we binge drink more here, that becomes problematic, because that absolutely has an impact on everything you just said. Mm-hmm. And so everything within moderation, like alcohol generally is not great for you, but it's not bad for you if you're being moderate about it, like most things.
Right.
I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I think personally for me, there's a sweet spot with alcohol and sex for me. Yeah. Now, if I'm 1 or 2 drinks in, that's when I'm prime, because I'm a little horny. Like my inhibitions have dropped just a little bit. I'm ready to try new things, but I'm not so drunk that I can't perform.
Right. Or you can still be present.
Yes.
And then you're not bloated either. I feel like when I drink alcohol, I'm like, my stomach's puffy, and then I'm like,
don't feel sexy.
Yeah, you don't feel sexy. I was like, I don't want to be on top now. So I feel like I got like a pooch or like whatever. And I'm like, no, I'm not a big fan of like drinking and sex. I feel like, because like the same thing where I'm like, do I actually really like this person?
Right.
Or, you know, and so for me, like, but I do like smoking weed and sex.
Oh, okay.
I feel like physically it helps like my body just be like way more calm and like way more chill, that I feel like my body's just like more like like receptive. Like I feel like I feel things more, and so I'm more so that than alcohol.
I can understand that. I just think for me, cottonmouth is such a real side effect of marijuana that I have a hard time even being able to like suck his dick or something because I just have no moisture left in my mouth. And I'm a big fan of spit during sex too. So I would like often want to like, you know, get his dick wet or even get my vagina wet with spit. And I don't have that ability with weed. Yeah. But I do understand like the feeling things more effectively. And I feel like that the feeling is where people go to like ecstasy or
coke, GHP,
cocaine, GHP. Sure. What is the ketamine? That's the new one that people have
not so much new. That one's been around for a really long time.
It's just new to me.
It's been around for a really long time. So it's a tranquilizer for horses typically, and then you end up cooking it and it becomes a powder. Well, you cook it in like a pan in the oven and then it becomes a powder.
Not the actual drug users. You're buying it as a powder, right?
Most of the time now, it's gone through a lot of different phases. When I was young, people would buy the bottle, and then you pour it, you cook it, and you create your own, and then put them in.
Wow.
And all that stuff.
That's a lot of work for a drug.
No, not really. You're buying it. You know it's good. You know it's secure. You've done it yourself. It takes 30 minutes in an oven. I don't know how long it actually takes in the oven, but it doesn't take that long in the oven.
Ingredients. You need a nonstick silver pan, 1 stick of butter. We're like, I think he knows what he's doing here. Yeah.
Two parts. Right. So none of those things. But I know people that have certainly done it, and it was very popular for a long time. And then they changed the composition of the tranquilizer, so it was oil based, so then you couldn't cook it so that people wouldn't do it. I know that it's still around.
It's making a comeback, especially in the spiritual community. Like
I haven't seen it, but I don't. All I do is
using it for
because I guess like it's kind of like MDMA where he was talking about on the previous episode where it can like heal trauma or whatever. So they're doing it now where they're doing like I think it's like through like an IV drip or something.
Really?
Right?
That'd be interesting. I haven't read anything on an IV drip because it's a tranquilizer, so it would knock you out. There's like a balance and a chemistry that changes when it becomes a powder and you inhale it.
Got it.
But I'd be curious to know because I'm actually not sure.
Right.
I haven't gone out to a dance club in quite some time.
Right.
So what is it in those drugs specifically that it is more considered a party sex drug? What is it about those drugs in particular?
So, well, it's going to depend, right? So it's habit, it's access, it's exposure. It's going to be a couple of different things. So if we're talking about ketamine was often used in conjunction or after ecstasy back in the day. I'm not sure about right now. But back in the day, you would use it and it would bring back a slightly different high post-ecstasy. And so it was quite common. But things like Coke and GHP have very different impacts and affect you very differently.
Right.
So
it's interesting to me that you said that ketamine used to be used as a follow-up to ecstasy because I feel like ecstasy lasts for so long.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a very extended high as opposed to like we mentioned poppers in this episode. We were talking about that before we started the show, how quick poppers are. And I had no idea. I've never used a popper, but they're 15 to 20 seconds of pleasure, right? So it's a very short-lived as opposed to anytime I've taken ecstasy, it's been an hour.
Like 6 to 8 hours.
Yeah. And I'm ready to be done when it's coming down.
It depends what you're doing. So if you're using it specifically to have sex, that's going to be different than if you're using it to go out dancing and then have a whole evening and then have foreplay and then have all those things, at which point 3 hours is not enough. Right? So it depends.
Well, and I feel like ecstasy is kind of a drug that you would use for an evening. You know, like a bunch of you are going out partying, so a bunch of you take ecstasy, and you can be in a club. It's going to be an awkward experience, but you can be there. Yeah. But I feel like poppers, per se, are specifically for sex, correct?
I don't know anybody using poppers outside of that arena
Right,
for
right.
sure.
And now, just so everyone knows what the poppers are doing, they give kind of an instant
High. It gives you like a kind of a
release, though.
a loopy high that relaxes your body, and that's
relax.
often why people will use it to engage in anal sex, because it does help you relax those muscles. So since it helps you relax the sphincter and kind of get things in there.
Is that because there's not a lot of foreplay in the
I mean, that's certainly
gay community?
there's certainly an argument to be made for that,
Right.
in some instances,
Yeah.
absolutely. But some people in relationships still use poppers too. So
Okay.
Right.
you know, it's just what you're used to, what you like. There is kind of a component where it becomes somewhat dependent, like
Right.
a lot of drugs, and so that's where things become problematic when you can't not use them.
Right. I think that's the case in any of these things that we're going to talk about is that creating that dependency. But one thing that Monarey, you had mentioned before we started doing any of this is we were talking about, addicts being addicts, and I'm an addict myself. I had a previous meth addiction. I've had a cocaine addiction. I feel like I still have an alcohol addiction. I have a marijuana addiction, but I will replace addictions with other things. I will replace, alcohol with working out or whatever. But you recently said that you had sex with a sober person and that they had replaced their need for alcohol or drugs with sexuality and with having sex with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Which was like, so has been sober for a while now, but I realized like he was a very sexual person, and then as I was like having sex with him, I was like, oh, like this, because like when someone like gets like high, like, and you can like see them like take a hit and you see them like be affected by it. It was like that, which at first was like flattering. I was like, oh my God, like he's so obsessed with my vagina.
Yeah.
Like he's getting a hit off this. But then it was like, oh, it's too much, to where it's like he like can't like stop like touching my vagina, or just like can't stop like trying to have sex with me. And I'm like, chill. And it's like, and I was like, oh, it's because he's an addict that he's like, okay, I'll come over tomorrow. Okay, I'll come over tomorrow. Okay, I'll come. And I'm like, relax.
Right.
Like even when I was like breaking up with him, he's like, can we still have sex one more time?
Oh
and I'm
my
like,
God.
no, like that's like the whole point of a breakup. Is
Wow.
the sex is gonna stop.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Sexual addiction is a real thing, though.
For sure.
Right? And so we have to be really careful about sexual addiction. It's certainly stigmatized, and there's some problems of how people view it, but it's certainly a real thing that it's negative if it's causing a problem in your life, like a few things we've discussed. It doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing.
right.
And so it certainly wasn't for your vagina at the time.
Yeah, I was like, I have
until
to
it
ice
was.
my vagina. I have to
Yeah.
put blueberries on my vagina right now because a little too much. Yeah.
Blueberries, that's good.
Do like
I
frozen
that.
blueberries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Smart.
And then
Yeah.
from there straight to the smoothie. Perfect.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, hello. 2-in-1, baby.
Got to get that protein in one way or the other. Okay, so obviously everyone kind of uses, not everyone, I will not say that. I don't want to put that broad of a blanket, but a large amount of people were obviously using drugs with sex, whether that be alcohol or it be cocaine or marijuana or mushrooms, anything like that. But there is a more prevalence in the gay community. And I think in the gay community, it's more of the poppers type of situation. That's like the quick, easy drug. And then you did say that gay and bisexual men are 1.6 times more likely than heterosexuals to use drugs with the specific intent of enhancing a sexual experience. Now, do you think that that's because they're just more open sexually?
I mean, there's probably a lot of theories out there right now. I would say that access to sex is probably one variable. Having access and doing it often,
Right.
right? And so, and then being introduced to these things in those communities. If
Right.
someone else is using it, they're going to introduce you to it perhaps more in those environments than perhaps a heterosexual hookup on Tinder.
Right.
Maybe, right?
And you did mention before, so obviously the poppers can give this sense of this release and this like relaxation, which could also lead to more problems in the instance of you get a little bit too experimental, making it dangerous?
Sure. Well, it can be dangerous in that you can harm yourself like anything in sex. You can harm yourself if it's too big or if you're not going slow enough. All of those things still apply. You're relaxed, so it's going to potentially slide in there. But if anyone's being a little bit more aggressive than they should, you can have micro tears. You can have tears. You can have tears of the rectum. Like, there are a lot of things that happen. You have to be very careful in sex in general, but specifically when anal sex is involved, because there's a lot of dangerous things that could happen.
Right.
And now I was also reading, it said that poppers can lower the blood oxygen level. How exactly does that work, and what is that doing to the body?
So what ends up happening is it gives you like the head rush, and that's what that head rush actually is. And so with that head rush is how you're relaxing. So it's all interrelated. So they all kind of work together in unison to slide it in easier, right? And so that head rush is lower oxygen level.
But it said that can increase sexual injury. How does that?
Well, by everything we just said.
Okay.
That's how it increases injury. Yeah.
Okay. Just by being more reckless, basically.
Because if you're not feeling it doesn't hurt as much in this 30 seconds, the next 30 seconds, once it wears off, if you tore something along the way, you're going to feel it when it ends, right? Because it gives you that high for 30 seconds at most. And I think that's being optimistic as far as how long it lasts. But then you keep doing it throughout, right? So it's not like you're just doing it once and it's lasting 30 seconds. It's you're doing it, you're having sex, you're doing some more, you're having sex, you're doing some more. So it's a whole sexual encounter.
Right. So really it's just delay. I feel like that's kind of like a lactate, where people are like, oh, take a lactate, you can eat dairy. You're like, no, you take it and it just will delay the reaction. So I was like, my stomach still hurts and I still have to poop and I'm still everything still happens. It's just like not in the moment when you're at dinner. And so you're like, okay, I feel like it sounds like that. Like a popper is just kind of like a delayed thing where it's like, you're going to feel the pain.
For right now, it feels great.
Yeah.
But later you will feel that.
Yeah.
Only if you're doing something crazy. If you're being smooth and soft and you're very well lubricated.
Oh, gotcha.
There's a lot, the bad doesn't always happen.
Okay.
But the bad can happen, and that's what we should just be conscious of. We should just be careful when you're doing those things and go slow and use lots of lubricant. And as we get older, we need more lubricant, period. There's no argument about it. Men, women, everybody. And everybody in between, right? And so all of those things, slow and steady wins the race.
Yes.
For sure.
Yeah. So we did discuss the stimulants, obviously. So the stimulants are going to be more like the cocaine, the MDHD. But what we didn't discuss is the opioids, okay? Right? And now what exactly is the opioid? What's the class of opioids that we're discussing?
So there's a lot of different types, right? And so painkillers have been probably some of the most popular.
Like Valium, Vicodin, like
absolutely.
That type of
thing. For sex?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just feel like that would just put you to sleep.
Right. Or just be too relaxed or like do whatever you want.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Well, I certainly can't speak to anybody's preferences, but what I can say is that especially in the last few years, those are the drugs that people are overdosing on most of the time. We can also say that Coke might be on the list because of things like fentanyl.
Right.
And so the fentanyl crisis is absolutely a serious crisis.
Right.
And opioids were like what led us there or what helped us get to some of these problems with drug addiction. There's parts of parts of the U.S. that are plagued with opioid use and overdoses. And so opioids is where you start to get dangerous, other than Coke, right? Because Coke is dangerous because now things can be cut. Any of the powders can be cut with fentanyl.
Is the opioid?
It's a very, 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 very strong one.
Okay.
And so what you could do as like a line of Coke would kill you, period, if it was fentanyl.
Wow. Well, I heard that even like a grain of the size of like a salt grain of fentanyl will absolutely kill you.
Paralyze.
It really is like a really big drug killer right now.
Yeah.
And that's why powdery drugs and stuff, it's just a dangerous time to do any of those. I think it's a little scary. 20 years ago, that wasn't the case. But fentanyl didn't exist back then.
Right.
Oh, it didn't?
Not really. Not where everybody had access to it the way that you have access now. And so all of a sudden, a bump of coke could kill you for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That happened with like
comics recently.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very scary.
Yeah, 3 of them died.
Mm-hmm.
And so a bump of coke wouldn't have killed you before.
Wow.
And so just a little bit of fentanyl, it's very scary. And so,
Yeah.
people are going to use drugs, but
Yeah.
we also have to use them in moderation.
Yeah.
We need to know where they come from. You can't buy them on the street. Like,
You're like,
it's
just stick with
complicated.
shrooms and marijuana.
Right.
Come on. Yeah.
So obviously we know that there are many different drugs that people are using, and obviously different ways that they affect one's sex, wanting it more or less often. It can change your libido. Any of those drugs will change your libido in a good way or a bad way. Some of them will stimulate, and then some of them will absolutely take it away. And some of them have the ability to do both, just depending on how much you take of it, right? The physical arousal can also be affected by drugs and alcohol.
Absolutely. That one specifically, vaginal lubrication is a huge variable.
Yep.
Erection's also a huge variable. So some guys that can't get an erection, say on Coke or something, will
Or
use, or alcohol for sure, will use something else. And those can magnify to create problems. Because if you're using ED medication, you shouldn't be drinking alcohol. And you shouldn't be.
Thought about that.
So to counteract Coke, you could take ED medication. And so, but that can potentially create a variety
Explode
of
your
problems.
heart.
Yeah, it's like that feels like a heart attack.
Right.
And some people have died that way
Yeah.
for sure.
Wow.
Not a lot, but some. And so it's really going to depend on a lot of things.
I think that all the time about like someone dying and while I'm having sex with them. Like I don't even know what I would
Oh
do.
my gosh, that would be. I think Richard Pryor or somebody has their dad died, or like Kevin Hart. No, I think it's like Richard Pryor, but yeah, his dad died while having sex. While having sex.
I mean, great for him, but
Yeah,
for the person
the
you're having
woman,
sex with,
yeah, you have to
how
be like, hey,
terrifying.
my vagina killed a man.
yeah.
I'm pretty sure a heart attack is bad for both.
Right.
Well,
yeah,
right,
yeah,
but
yeah.
it's way worse for the person
But
surviving
it's better
it.
than like getting hit by a car or
Yeah.
getting shot. You're like, well, you had an orgasm.
It
and,
might not
yeah.
be so bad if I were riding him, but to be underneath,
Oh
oh my god,
gosh, you
Just
have to be like
trapped under a dead man
Yeah, do
with
I
his
call
penis inside you.
911? Yeah.
And then am I into necrophilia? Like, what is happening?
Right. Am I
Rigor
in the
mortis
will?
while it's in there. I don't know.
Yeah.
God, oh my god.
That wouldn't happen. It takes more
Yeah.
time than that. But yeah.
Okay, so basically, other things that are going to be affected, of course, are going to be your orgasm, right? So your orgasm is going to be wildly affected through drugs. And I will even say I've been on ecstasy and tried having an orgasm, and it's damn near impossible.
Oh, really?
I had sex for what felt like hours, and
Yeah.
like nobody was going to come. I don't know
Wow.
what it was, but it's just like that point in your head where you just can't get to an orgasm. I feel like that happens a lot when drug use is involved in sex, no?
There's certainly some drugs that are more prone to kind of creating those environments. And there's more certain drugs that you use more when you know sex is the intention.
Right.
And others when sex is a byproduct of having used the drugs. So there's probably
Yeah.
a couple of different approaches
Yeah.
in that. So you do some drugs, you're having a great time, you end up having sex versus you're taking drugs to have sex.
Right.
And you're engaging in that way. And so in the LGBT community, the like party and play and chemsex is quite popular, and there's a large following in the adult film industry of those kinds of videos, whether it's implied or whether it's actually happening. That's more your area,
Right.
But it's certainly a genre that people really gravitate towards. But those are typically slamming drugs when you're injecting. With the purpose of sex.
Gotcha.
Right? So that's different than as a byproduct of sex where no one's orgasming at the end because everybody was on ecstasy or something
Right,
like that.
yeah.
Right? And it kind of works for men in a similar way. If they can get an erection, which some guys can and some guys can't, it has nothing to do with anything other than chance and biology. But if they can, then orgasming can be very, very difficult. And sometimes people end up hurting themselves trying to orgasm when they cannot.
Right.
Right?
Well, obviously, we know there's more like sexual risk involved when you're including drugs and alcohol, mainly because your inhibitions are so low.
Yeah.
You know, and you're just, like you said, like, okay, I feel good right now. Like, let's try that 12-inch dick, you know, bring it on over. Or let's try that girl sitting in the corner.
Yeah.
She looks cute.
Bring your friends.
Whatever. Right. A lot more danger can be brought into the situation through drugs and alcohol. But I can't remember the last time I've had completely sober sex. Actually, yes, I can. I can remember a time having sober sex. It was just before a hike, so I was completely sober in the morning. But it's super rare for me.
Oh, really?
I know.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's like a normal thing, but for me, maybe just being sober is super rare for me. It's so sexy.
I think a lot of people who are like single and they're like having flings probably not having sober sex.
Yeah.
But I think like if you're in like relationships or dating people, then you're probably having sober sex.
I agree
So I
with
feel
that.
like I'm probably mostly having sober sex. But me and the guy that I was dating, like we did like to have sex like on acid, and it feels amazing.
Yeah. Interesting.
Some guys can orgasm multiple times on
Yeah.
acid. Specifically,
Interesting.
I am a golden god!
That's really good to
Some.
know.
Yeah,
Some.
yeah.
But if they can't, then what does that mean? It has nothing to do with you or anything
Right.
else, right?
True.
So that's not always fair, because
Yeah.
let's do it and then you can't, and then I'm disappointed.
Right.
Well, that's not his fault, and it has nothing to
Yeah.
do with anything other than chance and biology.
For sure.
Typically, right?
But we always have a good time. So I was like, try it. If you're an adult. And
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
Right,
you're
right.
safe.
Yeah. But for sure, there is definitely no class of drug that is going to be always completely safe. And again, no single class of drugs that is going to be the most dangerous in any situation. So I would just say use your best judgment, stay safe, and let's not drop those inhibitions all too low. And just remember that safe sex is always the best option. So anything else you would like to add to the show, Dr. Eddie?
No, gosh, we've covered quite a bit of ground.
We did cover quite a lot. I think I feel pretty good about the show.
Yeah, I feel great.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Eddie, for all your help and all your wisdom. We really appreciate you. And Monterey, can you tell the people where they can find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Monarey M, and then you can also find me on YouTube under Monarey Martinez.
Perfect. Thank you again for being with us. We appreciate all of your expertise and
Failures.
Yeah, we all got them. So,
Yeah.
All right, guys, that's it for today. If you like what you saw, please hit that little subscribe button. And until next time, adios.